Well, everyone, welcome tonight to this presentation, The Case Against Fluoride with Dr. Paul Connett. I'm going to be doing the initial phase of this seminar by talking about the work of Dr. Weston A. Price, the Canadian dentist who basically was able to determine the real cause of tooth decay. But before I get started, there are several people that I'd like to thank for helping put this evening together. First of all, of course, it's Dr. Paul Connett, who's here all the way from New York State, and the People for Safe Drinking Water. And they're here tonight as well. Chris, Callie, Rob, Nikki, Sean Keating is here. He's donated a lot of his money in order to help pay for a videographer and also donate 200 discs that are sitting outside of the professionals' perspectives that you were watching as you sat down in here tonight. That's a very important DVD that you'll want to take home and share with your friends and even possibly give to people you know who may be in the dental or medical professions. Michael Van Holst is here tonight as well. He's been donating a lot of his time. Grant Pace and many others. I can't name everybody, but I know there's a lot of volunteers who have been very diligently handing out posters around the city to announce tonight's events. So many, many thanks to all of you. But most of all, I really do need to thank the library for letting us use this room. We have an incredible library, Central Library here in London, Ontario, that allow very progressive evenings like this to take place. And I really encourage you to send an email to the people here at the library and thank them for allowing these evenings to take place. Really, we couldn't be luckier as a city to have a library as open-minded as this library. Okay. So please let them know about that. And also, I want to basically let everyone know there's some volunteers in the audience with a registry to write your name and email on. This is voluntary. You don't need to write your name on it. If somebody can make sure that the volunteers are handing out the clipboards so that you can write your names and emails on it, that would be wonderful. Subsequent to tonight, if we're having a lot of difficulty still with even city council members, we may have to do a petition or a plebiscite or something to follow up with this evening to try and continue our efforts to remove fluoride from city water. And I'd like to, on that note, acknowledge in the audience any city councillors who may be here this evening that would like to make themselves known. If you're a city councillor here tonight, please stand up and acknowledge yourself. I know Denise is here. There's Denise Brown. Thank you, Denise. Standing ovation for Denise. Standing ovation. And another, we have to include another one for a standing ovation. If you could, Joni Beck is here tonight. And now I apologize, did I miss any city councillors? It's crowded in here. Okay, so we have 2 city councillors here tonight. We want to acknowledge you for being here. That's wonderful. And also, I just want to make a note of something that was said in the London Free Press with regards to pseudoscience and not finding credible information on the internet. I found that a very strong statement to make, a very disturbing statement to make in the media to discourage us from getting information about fluoride from the internet, when indeed you can find a lot of peer-reviewed studies on the internet that are promoting or telling us about a lot of problems that we're finding with fluoride. You can go to National Institutes of Health and find several studies, published peer-reviewed studies, showing potential dangerous effects of fluoride on humans and even animals as well. So there are studies that are online. There's a lot of bad information on the internet. I agree with you. I agree with that side of the story. But my goodness, there's a lot of tremendous, powerful, and very credible information on the internet. So please don't let those types of statements discourage you from doing research on the internet. You can do your own due diligence by finding the source of the study and making sure that it's credible as well. And also, I want to acknowledge one other person before I formally get started, and it's Andy Oudman from CJBK. Please. I can't tell you what a brave man he is for having me on his show. So, Andy, keep up the great work. I think you're in here. You're in here. You're here? Andy, wonderful. Thank you so much. We're going to be on the air tomorrow morning? Thumbs up. Okay, so we're going to do some follow-up for tomorrow as well. So please tune in from 9 to 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. Thank you, Andy. So let's see if we can get started here. Before I get into some of the issues in and around nutrition and fluoride itself, I want to open your minds to an issue that is very, very central to this debate that we're having on fluoride, and that is the integrity of science. We need to question science today. I agree, I am a big fan of science. As long as science is credible, as long as it's well done, I think science can really be tremendously helpful. But today, unfortunately, it's helpful for a lot of shareholders. It's helpful for a lot of industry out there, but it's not really helping us. So I want you to keep that in mind whenever you hear anybody who calls themselves an expert and question the money trail, question how studies are done. Look to see if there's debates on issue. Look to see how long-running a belief system has been in place in science, and if it's an antiquated belief system, because today we know a lot more than we did 60 or so years ago. We need to stay up to date on science. We can't just settle for old science. And this is just a couple of articles. I have a whole file on this. I do a whole seminar on the corruption in science. This is from Yale University and University of Michigan. The title of this paper is called "The Perils of Ignoring History, Big Tobacco Played Dirty and Millions Died. How Similar is Big Food?" Again, question the integrity of science. Dr. John Ioannidis, this was recently published in The Atlantic. The title speaks for itself: Lies, Damn Lies, and Medical Science. Basically, through his research, he's discovered that as much as 90% of the published medical information that doctors rely on is flawed. It has been estimated that it would take 700 hours a month to read the thousands of academic articles relevant to a GP. Doctors skim, they take shortcuts, they rely on summaries, or worse. So there's no possible way to keep up with the research. And many times when doctors read the summaries of research, they don't read the actual study itself. And the summary can actually contradict the research that was done in the body of the study. So it's very, very disturbing to me when I find these things out. And this is a quote from the British Food Journal, from the editor. And this comment sends shivers down my spine. This was in response to a group of scientists around the world who had asked the British Food Journal to retract a study that was incredibly flawed, that was a published study. And the editor started off by saying, "A common misconception is that science and research are about facts." I'm going to say that again. A common misconception is that science and research are about facts. An editor from the British Food Journal. If that doesn't scare you as a consumer, then I don't know what is going to scare you, because these are people we're supposed to be turning to protect our health. And industry-funded science is not science. In a recent study published by PLOS Medicine, that's the Public Library of Science, it's an independent online research publication. You don't see any ads from pharmaceutical companies, for example, in their publications. And in one recently published study, according to one of the authors, he's saying if a study is funded by the industry, it may be closer to advertising than science. And that's exactly what we're looking at today. Marketing-based science, not evidence-based science. I want to see science return to evidence-based science, not science that is coming to conclusions to suit industry. And here's just a little humor. There they are again, the 5 most terrifying words in TV news, according to a new study. Here's another one, from evidence-based medicine to marketing-based medicine, evidence from internal industry documents. While much excitement has been generated surrounding evidence-based medicine, internal documents from the pharmaceutical industry suggest that the publicly available evidence base may not accurately represent the underlying data regarding its products. The industry and its associated medical communication firms state that publications in the medical literature primarily serve marketing interests. How many people in the audience are pissed off when you read about things like this? You can tell I am. Should you trust your doctor? 20% of Canadians say doctors do more likely to make errors now than they were 10 years ago. 39% say doctors are more concerned about dealing quickly with patients. 40% say doctors care less about patients than 10 years ago. Over 50% say doctors don't readily admit to their mistakes. And finally, some 67% of Canadians do not believe doctors have their best interests at heart. And that was according to a Maclean's poll back in August of 2010. And a lot of what's happening, with regards to our healthcare system, is that we're not questioning the sacred cow. We're not questioning our health officials. Yet look at how sick we are today, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. We're incredibly sick when you look at the number of mental disorders we're seeing today, chronic diseases. To me, it's just unacceptable when we're spending billions of dollars on healthcare, and by 2030, they're going to keep getting worse, because by 2030, here in Ontario, healthcare is expected to take up 80% of our operating costs. So we need to turn over every stone in order to look at what we can do as a society to make sure that we have wonderful quality of life into our senior years, and a high quality of mental and physical health. So one way that we're being distracted, it's a very, very clever way of getting us to not look at the issues. And one way they do it is by telling us, well, we're living longer today. Well, I really question that. And one way to summarize why I would question that is because when you remove the variables that killed us 100 years ago, that don't kill us today, you would see probably that we may be only living a few years longer. And there are some amateur number crunchers online who've done this and questioned this. So remember that and consider, with the marginal improvements that we probably are experiencing, that's along with billions of dollars going into healthcare as well. So I don't think we're getting great value for our money. But let me just read these quotes to give you more of a perspective on questioning the mantra, oh, we're living longer today. Life expectancy in the United States is over 74 years, increased from 49 years in 1900. Now this sounds like an amazing increase, but almost all of this gain in life expectancy is due to a reduction in infant mortality. The sad fact is that the life expectancy of a 50-year-old male today is only about 2 years longer than it was almost 100 years ago. And then a very similar view here, fewer persons alive at 70 today survive until 90 than 40 years ago. And those who do survive past 70 are often a helpless burden to their families rather than useful members of society. Credit for today's relatively long lifespan belongs to improved sanitation and the reduction in infant mortality. So something is terribly wrong when we're spending billions of dollars on healthcare, and yet we're still seeing over 80% of the population die from chronic disease. That would be things like, cancer, heart disease, diabetes. So, I don't think anybody in this room wants to have a poor quality of life in their senior years. I don't think anybody in this room wants to suffer the ravages of those illnesses. And yet, here we see it's expected that over 80% of us will. And yet, in 2003, the World Health Organization tried to tell us, that basically in this report said that it's processed foods that are causing chronic disease and obesity. And keep in mind, with obesity, there are over 40 health conditions associated with obesity. So imagine how much our healthcare costs would go down if, for example, public health would put warnings on processed foods like they did with cigarettes when we learned that cigarettes were associated with cancer. It's those middle aisles in the grocery store that are basically killing us. And decreasing the quality of our lives. Now, I teach hours and hours and hours of classes to demonstrate this even further. Tonight you're just getting a sound bite. But my goal is to keep teaching and teach as many people as I can about the differences between nutrient-poor foods and nutrient-dense foods. And that's essentially what we need to honor when we see the World Health Organization warning us, and yet the media will not cover this story. This report only made a blip in the radar in the media. So these are the foods, essentially. I mean, I'm only giving you literally some snapshots here. Look at the foods that line our middle aisles. I mean, my goodness, they blind you. You can't see real food in the grocery store, beyond these aisles. They're blinding us. And they do nothing for your health. It doesn't matter how many fancy labels or claims are on these packages. They're not good for you, period. And of course, if in the 1950s, animal fats were blamed. Animal fats and cholesterol were the fall guys, so to speak, with regards to the increased rates of heart disease that were being witnessed back in that era. Unfortunately, sugar was disregarded. Sugar did not get blamed. It was the animal fats and cholesterol, and it really has done all of us a disservice that the scientific community took that stance and didn't look at the fact that it was our increased consumption in sugar that was really contributing to a lot of the inflammatory conditions that we're seeing today. Inflammatory conditions such as cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, of course. And just look, in 1700 we may have consumed 4 pounds of sugar per year. In 2000, it's about 150 pounds of sugar a year. And I mean, anybody with a rational mind can see that this has got to have an impact on our health. But the sugar lobby is very powerful in our governments, and it's very difficult to get this information out to people. Why would I write a book about addiction? Well, I think when you consider how addictive sugar is, how much people can consume in a day, and what it's doing to our nervous system, it's just devastating, been devastating to us as a species to see the decline in our physical and mental health as we have increased these very nutrient deficient, very damaging foods in our diets. Unprecedented in the history of mankind. So here's a shameless plug on my book, and I do this because I'm trying desperately to warn people about this rise in depression and mental disorders that we're seeing today and where it's going to with regards to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. We have got to look at nutrition, folks. We have no choice right now. And they will not. They think it's somehow testing that's going to solve these problems or drugs that are going to solve these problems. And my goodness, we've been using testing and we've been using drugs for decades now, and look at how sick we are. We've got to start putting attention into nutrition. So I wrote this book. It was a labor of love for me. And thank you very much. And addiction is our #1 health problem, by the way. So let's look at some science here just quickly. This was published in the Journal of Dental Research in 2009. Children with the best dietary practices were 44% less likely to exhibit severe early childhood caries compared with children with the worst dietary practices. Now, this doesn't say anything about dental decay being caused by a fluoride deficiency, does it? Okay, it's nutrition. So let's look at what a dentist discovered back in the 1920s and 30s. Dr. Weston A. Price, a genius in his time. In the 1920s, he started seeing a change in children. He had never seen cavities. He'd never seen crooked teeth. And keep in mind, he was treating the parents of these children. So he had a frame of reference to work with. And I encourage you all, after you leave here, to visit the website, westonaprice.org, to look more deeply into this issue, and to buy his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. We've got to change this healthcare crisis that we have. Dr. Price is actually a huge part of the solution. So the medical school, somebody at the medical school needs to read this book. And there's Dr. Weston A. Price. So after he started seeing tooth decay in the 1920s, he decided to travel around the world and see what was happening in other areas. And what he discovered, he found out that in primitive cultures where they had access to their local foods, minimally processed foods, nutrient-dense foods, that these people had beautiful teeth. And that in neighboring villages or towns where trucks were delivering condensed milk, margarine, jams, jellies, flour, sugar, all these newfangled foods, unprecedented in the history of mankind basically, that these nutrient-deficient foods were displacing the nutrient-dense foods. And as that occurred in certain areas, then in the first generation he could see the dental decay and the crooked teeth. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to see that there's something that's very depleting about these foods when he took so many images as a result. So let's take a look at what may have happened in these neighboring areas in the South Pacific. Dr. Price's nephew was a photographer for National Geographic, so he had access to a camera and took hundreds and hundreds of pictures while he traveled the world. Now look at these young teenage boys and their teeth. Beautiful, straight teeth, virtually no cavities in these primitive cultures. And they didn't floss their teeth, they didn't brush their teeth, they didn't have fluoride in their water, or artificial fluoridated water. They had naturally straight, beautiful, healthy teeth. But then when he went into neighboring areas where they got the modernized, westernized foods, then he would see the devastation, the tooth decay, the crooked teeth, the narrow jaws, and from that you could see the rise in things like cancer and even tuberculosis, infectious diseases. In the Australian Aborigines, again, look at these gorgeous teeth. No dentists, no fluoridated water, no dental floss. Yet they were able to have beautiful teeth. And then in neighboring areas, of course, you see the sharp contrast. And even their genetics started to change as well in the last images on what I think would be my left here. You can see that their appearances actually began to change. And I have outside posters that you can take a look at, which will give you a summary of some of the foods that they may have been eating in these areas. And in Africa, again, look at these gorgeous teeth. And then the contrast where modernized foods were introduced. And you can see this if you even go into natural history museums. You can see skulls during archaeological digs where they've dug up some skulls before, for example, modern societies surfaced, or agriculture, for example, where you would have found even hunter-gatherers, very, very primitive hunter-gatherers. These skulls had beautiful, beautiful dental structures. So buried skulls throughout Australia in this image provide a dependable record of their physical excellence and splendid facial and dental arch forms. In the lower pictures are shown the skull dome of a typical Australian Aborigine for comparison with that of the recently discovered Peking man, who possibly lived about 1 million years ago. So you can do your own research on this, but you will find that these very primitive cultures, their skulls that are being dug up have beautiful teeth. Now, our Assistant Officer of Health, Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Warshawski, said at the Board of Health meeting that elderly people need fluoride because their teeth fall out, so they need fluoride, which I found a very strange remark because, no offense to any of my friends who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, or beyond, typically what I see with the elderly is they have terrible teeth. They're oftentimes wearing false teeth. Now, did our primitive cultures need false teeth? Well, what did Dr. Price find? Dr. Price found out that many primitive peoples not only retain all of their teeth, many of them into an old age, but also have healthy flesh supporting these teeth. This has occurred in spite of the fact that the primitives had not had dentists to remove the deposits and no means for doing so for themselves. So imagine that. The elderly, senior citizens in primitive cultures had beautiful teeth until they died. And this is what we see today with our children, of course, the very narrow jaws. I had, of course, pretty much in all of my teeth, I have fillings, and of course I had to have orthodontics. I had to have straight, to get the teeth that I have right now, I needed some work done, of course. So my teeth were crooked, I'd say before I was 16. I think I had braces when I was about 16. So that's more commonplace today. And here's just some pictures in North America that we know here in North America. We have seen people who have beautiful wide jaws and straight teeth. There are people out there that have been raised on traditional foods and can achieve that beautiful dental health and that beautiful look, that nice wide jaw. So what I teach is the work of Dr. Weston A. Price. I taught my first class on Saturday. For the next 3 Saturdays, I will be completing my seminars and going into great detail on what foods actually cause these people to be so healthy, not just physically, but mentally. And so what I cover is the importance of healthy animal fats, pasture-fed animal foods, certain, even supplements like cod liver oil is tremendous, homemade bone broths, lacto-fermented condiments and beverages, and the proper preparation of grain. So I go into a tremendous amount of detail on these subjects for the next 3 weeks, right here at the library across the hall in the Stevenson and Hunt room. So I have brochures outside, flyers outside, or my website is pamcolleen.com for any information about any of the events I have coming up. So with all of these newfangled foods in our diet, of course, something very terrifying is going on with our children. They're the 3rd generation, 4th generation on a diet that's heavily emphasized in processed foods. So even this research that was published in 2005, according to doctors fear Ontario children may not live as long as their parents. And keep in mind that 20% of our children today during their childhood are diagnosed with a mental disorder. This is not due to a Ritalin deficiency. Okay, this is clear nutritional work that needs to be done on these children, most precious people in society. So we need to do our due diligence as their caretakers. And so this is what I propose in my talks, is to reintroduce these wonderful nutrient-dense foods that we know for generations kept us healthy. It's not guesswork here. These are the foods that we know kept us healthy. So there's some of the dates. So March 5th, 12th, 19th, I'm going to be teaching across the hall here. My website's pamcolleen.com. And here's a quote, George Orwell: "In times of universal deceit, telling the truth will be a revolutionary act." Now, before I introduce our very special guest, Dr. Paul Connett, I want to point one little thing out here. It's a terrible little segue I just did, but I came across this information and I just can't resist telling you about it. I talk a lot about marketing and how we get drawn into products because they make all these wonderful claims. Because the food industry knows, for example, the more claims they can make, the more likely we're going to buy that product. And this was very true of toothpaste even in 1947. So what Pepsodent did in 1947 was it came out with an ad and basically fabricated a substance in the toothpaste to basically make it look sexier or more attractive. And so the ad said, "It's cleaner, brighter, taste means cleaner, brighter teeth. New Pepsodent, the only toothpaste containing irium, removes the film that makes your teeth look dull, uncovers the natural brilliance of your smile." And in a 1974 speech, the then FCC chairman, Reed Hunt, claimed that the irium mentioned in Pepsodent advertisements didn't exist. And it was somewhere shortly around this time, of course, that fluoride came to recognition. So at any rate, just wanting you to keep that in mind. So Dr. Paul Connett is here from New York State. He used to teach chemistry at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, and he is the co-author of this fabulous new book, The Case Against Fluoride. He'll be doing a book signing right after the event. There's some books outside there. And so we're going to go till about 8:30 or so, and then some question and answers. We have a microphone over here that I'll be addressing at around the 8:30 mark, because I know you're going to have a lot of questions. And even the people who are pro-fluoride, please ask your questions. We invite them very cordially. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Paul Connett.
Just a moment, there we go. Before I start, just to tack on from what Pam was just saying, in 1949, 1 year before the US Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation, an endorsement which took place before any trials had been completed and before any significant health studies had been published, the sugar lobby said, we need to find a way to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. And if you go back to that graph, you see a sharp increase in sugar consumption about the time that they introduced fluoridation. And in fact, the sugar lobby then proceeded to put an enormous amount of money setting up nutrition departments, funding nutrition departments, particularly at Harvard, Michigan, Rochester. And one of the first chairman of the nutrition department of Harvard, a gentleman called Dr. Fred Stair, went around the country and testified in Congress on the tremendous benefits of sugar as a nutrient and described Coca-Cola as a nutritious drink and also promoted fluoridation avidly, enthusiastically, and was the most vitriolic attacker of anybody that opposed fluoridation. A little bit of history there. So the case against water fluoridation. I hope that it's not good enough for me if you walk away with the notion that I present a strong case. I will only feel successful, and thank you very much for all coming. This is a marvellous audience. I think this is the largest audience I've spoken to on fluoride anywhere in the world. So it's not enough for me tonight for you to walk away and say, well, that man knows something about fluoride, and if only we could get him here, there, and everywhere to talk, we could end fluoridation. It's important for you to know these arguments. It's important for you to use these arguments. It's all about empowerment. Don't let them put you down. Don't let them say, we are brilliant, we have white coats, you're stupid, trust us, it's a good thing. I want you to learn these arguments. Okay, so there is a book. We've made this book as easy to read as we possibly can, but everything is documented. So if you're a scientist or want to go further, there's 80 pages of documentation. It's published by a small publisher called Chelsea Green. It's got a very good reputation in the United States. And it's written by three of us. Myself, a chemist, I specialize in environmental chemistry and toxicology at St. Lawrence. James Beck, who's an MD and PhD, formerly with the University of Calgary. And Jim led the fight against fluoridation in Calgary and got the council to vote 10-3 in February to stop fluoridation there. Speddy Micklem is a PhD from Oxford. He's a biologist. So between the three of us, we have a physicist, a chemist, and a biologist. And none of us had an axe to grind before we started researching this issue. And as you've already heard, I think, I don't get paid for doing this. This is a labor of love. I do it because, well, I'm happy to try to right a wrong here. And this is one of the things to bear in mind. I don't say that fluoridation is the biggest threat to human health. It isn't. I can think of other threats. You've heard one of them. I think obesity is probably the biggest threat to our health system imaginable. So it's not the biggest issue. But I can tell you this, it's the easiest issue to end. It's as simple to end as turning off a tap. If we have the political will, we can turn off this issue tomorrow. But to get that political will, we need a large number of people informed, educated, and organized to get that political will. And this tonight, together with the press coverage we already have, the television, the radio, and the press media, this is fantastic. So I'm very, very hopeful that London will be another victory soon to follow Waterloo and the other towns. Now, tonight I should be talking, the first thing is that fluoridation is unethical. This is an argument that's always been there. It's the strongest argument. It's a very poor medical practice. The evidence of any benefit is extremely weak. There is no adequate margin of safety from known health effects of fluoride. Let me make that clear right from the start. There is no argument that fluoride damages health. There's no argument that fluoride is a very toxic substance, no question at all. Millions of people have had their lives ruined in India, China, Mexico, parts of Africa, where they have high natural levels of fluoride in their drinking water. The argument then is not about whether fluoride damages health, but rather, is there an adequate margin of safety between the doses which we know cause harm to bones and the brain and the endocrine system in these studies, and the doses that our population are going to receive? And is there a margin of safety sufficient to protect everybody in society? Not just the average person, but everybody. Because if you put something in the water, you've got to protect everyone. If you can't protect everyone, then you shouldn't put it in the water. Because once you put it in the water, it's going to go to everyone. Promotion of fluoridation is unprofessional and unscientific. And finally, water fluoridation support is crumbling in North America, especially in Canada, and I think that Canada is going to lead the beginning of the end of fluoridation worldwide. So fluoridation is not ethical. No government has the right to force medication on its people, especially to fight a non-contagious, non-life-threatening disease. I think you can all envisage a time maybe the government has to step in and force vaccinations on people for something. If there's an outbreak of smallpox or something, then you expect the government to rush in, and then your private individual preferences may be overridden in the benefits of saving lives. But this is not one of those cases. We don't have to force medication, fluoride on people because we're frightened of people dying. Secondly, it deprives the individuals of their right to informed consent to medication. This is a very important right that we all have as patients. If you go to the website of the American Medical Association, they spell out very, very clearly the obligations of a doctor or anybody in the medical profession has to grant patients informed consent to medication. They are required to tell you the benefits of a drug and also the side effects of the drug, and then you are expected to make up your mind whether you're going to take that drug or not. And with fluoridation, that is removed from us. And so what is happening here is a government is doing to everyone what a doctor can do to no one. No doctor could force you to take medication. No doctor could pass you a glass of fluoridated water and say, you must drink that. I'm telling you to drink that, because if they tried to do that, they could lose their license. But incredibly, we're allowing, in some cases, whole countries, like Ireland, and whole states, like yesterday, Arkansas voted for mandatory fluoridation, believe it or not, in this day and age. Whole states, and in your case, a whole city, to do to everyone what a doctor can do to no one. Incredible. So that's the ethical argument. It's a poor medical practice. And to an indication of how poor this medical practice is, we haven't done it with anything since. Since fluoridation started in 1945, we have not used the public water supply to deliver medicine. Or vitamins, or any nutrients. Nothing. We just don't do that. All the other chemicals that we add to the water are to protect the water, to make the water safe to drink. We add chlorine to kill the bugs so we can drink the water safely. But fluoride is quite different. We're adding that to the water, simply using it as a vehicle to distribute a medicine to everybody. And it's a terrible vehicle, because whilst you can control the concentration at the waterworks, that's not the point. You can't control the dose that people get, because you can't control how much water they drink, and you can't also control how much fluoride they're getting from other sources, and it's the total amount of fluoride which can damage us. Ask any pharmacist if there's any drug in his store that you can tell a patient take as much as you like. You just can't do it. You can't do that. And whilst you're at it, ask him if there's any drug that can go to everybody, every human being in the town. to bottle-fed infants, to teenagers, to elderly people, people that are sick, people that have poor nutrition, people that have poor kidney function, people that are borderline iodine deficient. Could they all have the same drug? Absolutely not. And yet that's exactly what we do when we put it in the water. It goes to everybody, willy-nilly. Willy-nilly of their age, willy-nilly of their health status, willy-nilly of their nutritional status. Next, there's no individual supervision by a doctor. When a doctor writes you a prescription and you take it to the pharmacist and get that medicine, the understanding is he's done the best he can think of, but there is the expectation, the anticipation that the dose may be too high and you may have side effects, that you may be one of the individuals that's sensitive to that drug, and that you will go back to that doctor if that happens. Doctor, I'm feeling sick when I take this thing, and he changes it. But nobody's doing that. The doctors are not even trained in Canada to know what the side effects of fluoride might be. And yet we think as many as 1% of the population is sensitive to fluoride at low levels. They have gastrointestinal problems, they have neurological problems, they have dermatological problems, skin rashes and so on. But no doctors in Canada are trained to observe these things. So what they do is they give them all kinds of other drugs to treat these things, totally unnecessary, with their own side effects. Then you have no health agency monitoring for health effects. Health Canada has not undertaken any comprehensive, significant testing of the health of communities that are fluoridated. Basic studies have not been done. Basic monitoring has not been done. No systematic attempt has been made to measure the fluoride in people's urine to see how much fluoride they're getting. There's no check. I will go through a list of all the things which have not been investigated in Canada, and it's absolutely outrageous. And yet they turn around and say, well, we've been doing this for 50 years. We've been doing this for 60 years, and if there was any problem, we would know about it by now. Oh, no, you wouldn't know about a lot of these things unless you did the studies. And the absence of studies does not mean the absence of harm. And it's outrageous for them to assume that that is the case. Fluoride is not a nutrient. We get promoters to this day telling the people that fluoride is a nutrient. To establish that a substance is a nutrient, you have to starve the animal of that substance in its diet and demonstrate that disease accrues as a result. If you starve an animal of vitamin C, they'll get scurvy. But they've never demonstrated any disease caused by a lack of fluoride. And tooth decay, as Pam has made very clear, is not due to a lack of fluoride. It's largely due to too much sugar. Fluoride is a known toxic substance that interferes with many fundamental biochemical functions. The first opponents of fluoridation in the United States were biochemists. Biochemists who used fluoride to inhibit enzymes in their experiments. One of them was Dr. James Sumner, a Nobel Prize winner in enzyme chemistry. Since those days, when we knew that fluoride inhibited enzymes, which steer every chemical reaction in the body is steered by an enzyme. So you're asking for trouble if you put a known poison of enzymes into the body. What we also have learned since then, that fluoride interferes with G proteins, which send messages across membranes. And a Nobel Prize winner in enzyme chemistry. Since those days, when we knew that fluoride inhibited enzymes, which steer every chemical reaction in the body is steered by an enzyme. So you're asking for trouble if you put a known poison of enzymes into the body. What we also have learned since then, that fluoride interferes with G proteins, which send messages across membranes, and interferes with hydrogen bonding, which is at the heart of biological structure and function. So we're introducing a toxic substance into the body which has very, very significant biological properties and causes damage. The level used in fluoridation is not small. They like to say, oh, 1 part per million is so eeny, weeny, teeny, weeny, won't possibly hurt you. 1 part per million. They say, 1 part per million is 1 cent in $10,000. I remember they did similar things with dioxin. 1 part per trillion was like a 1-second vacation after working 33,000 years. And this was industry's trick to show that, you know, one part of the trick is negligible, it wouldn't hurt you. But the whole notion of making fun of these units as if that was saying something intelligent is utterly ridiculous. Whether 1 part per million is large or small, significant or insignificant, depends upon the chemical. For example, 1 part per million is 100 times the safe drinking water standard for arsenic. So if you're talking about arsenic, that's 100 times too much. If you're talking about dioxin, that's 1,000,000 times too much. So we need to have some scale on which to make a judgment, and the best scale, I think, is the one that nature has provided, and that's the level of fluoride in mother's milk. And that can be as low as 0.004 parts per million. And that's what shocked me 14 years ago when I found that statistic, because I don't think that nature screws up. Certainly doesn't screw up as much as we do. And the notion that dentists know more about what the baby needs than Mother Nature is absolutely preposterous. So what this means right now is a bottle-fed baby in London is getting 250 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby. And that's not, in my view, a wise or intelligent thing to do. Now, I don't think the fluoridation should ever have started. And there have been several places where it clearly should have been stopped. And one of them was in 1999, when the Centre of Disease Control, which is one of the big promoters of fluoridation, the big promoter of fluoridation worldwide, announced that they got the mechanism of fluoride's action benefit wrong. For 50 years, they thought that the baby needed to get fluoride before its teeth had erupted, so that the fluoride would have accumulated in the enamel, and so when the teeth emerged in the mouth, the enamel would be more resistant to the acid attack caused by the breakdown of sugar by bacteria. It causes acid, which attacks the enamel. And it is true that fluoride in the enamel makes it more resistant to acid attack. But then in 1999, they said, whoops, we were wrong. It turns out that not enough fluoride is incorporated in the enamel before the teeth have erupted to give you this protection. So all those pediatricians that were giving tablets to pregnant women and drops to babies before their teeth erupted, that was all useless, totally useless. And still we have pediatricians doing that, by the way. But the moment that they recognize that the major benefits are topical, that it works on the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. This is what they said. The major benefits, the predominant benefits of topical, not systemic, works from the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. That's when fluoridation should have stopped. Because clearly, if you want the topical benefits, you can get a tube of fluoridated toothpaste, brush it on your teeth, and spit it out. That solves the ethical problem, because it means you're not forcing fluoride on people that don't want it, number one. And it also solves the safety issue, because you're not swallowing the fluoride and exposing every toxic substance to this business. So fluoridation should have ended in 1999 when that admission was made. But of course it wasn't. Here are the two statements, by the way, from CDC. Its actions primarily are topical for both adults and children. That's 1999, and again in 2001, fluoride's predominant effect is post-eruptive, after the teeth have erupted, and topical. Somebody from the health department said on the radio that the value of drinking fluoridated water is it bathes the teeth. Well, next time you take a glass of water, see how many teeth are bathed with this water. When you drink a glass of water, you will find that the water hits your tongue, it bounces off the back of your front teeth, and it's straight down the gullet. And unless you swish like that, you do not bathe the teeth when you drink fluoridated water. Now, the chemicals used, this is another shock, and most dentists do not believe this, but it's absolutely true. The chemicals used are not pharmaceutical grade, as used in dental products. And by the way, they couldn't be. They couldn't be, because over 99% of these chemicals are absolutely wasted. They're used to wash the car, water the lawn, wash the dishes, flush the toilet. Less than 1% is actually drunk. And even less of that gets near the teeth. Yeah, and you couldn't afford to waste 99% of pharmaceutical grade. But we can afford to waste the stuff that we use because it's hazardous waste. It's hazardous waste from the phosphate fertilizer industry. It comes from the wet scrubbers. And let me give you a little history on this. For about 100 years, surrounding phosphate fertilizer plants, you will have found the vegetation was damaged, the citrus groves in Florida were damaged, and the cattle grazing on this grass were crippled. And after 100 years, we were slow learners, they decided to put a spray of water on to capture these two toxic gases, hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride. And the product that's produced, hexafluorosilicic acid, is not a man-made, it's not naturally occurring. They can't dump this into the sea by international law. They can't dump it locally because it's too concentrated. But one of the vagaries of hazardous waste regulations in the United States is if somebody purchases a hazardous waste from industry, it's no longer a hazardous waste, it's a product. And now it's a product that you can put it in the drinking water. It's incredible but true. And there was a funny example of this in Johnstown, New York. When they stopped fluoridating, they had a couple of barrels of this stuff left over. And they put out a memo, we've got to get rid of this within 2 months. Because then, if we don't get rid of it, we're going to have to pay to get rid of it as hazardous waste. It reverts to hazardous waste. So they had to find another community that was using it to use it up. Now, in addition to the hexafluorosilicic acid, it contains a whole bunch of other junk toxic metals like arsenic, chromium, lead, and so on, even radioactive materials. The same rock in Florida that's mined for phosphate fertilizer is also mined for uranium. So there are traces amount of radioactive isotopes there as well. These are the main chemicals then that are used, hexafluorosilicic acid or its sodium salt, and these chemicals have never been subjected to rigorous toxicological testing. The only testing that's been done has been done with sodium fluoride, not these silicon fluorides. Now, another extraordinary thing. The Food and Drug Administration has never regulated fluoride as a drug for ingestion. It either is prescription tablets or in water fluoridation. And as a result, fluoride has never been subjected to randomized clinical trials, which are the gold standard when you're regulating drugs for both effectiveness and safety. Never been done. In 60 years, there's never been a randomized clinical trial to demonstrate the effectiveness of swallowing fluoride. But the FDA does regulate fluoridated toothpaste in the United States. And if you go to America, you get a tube of toothpaste, this is what you'll see on the back. First of all, drug facts. Secondly, don't swallow. Thirdly, only use a pea-sized amount. And that's a pea-sized amount. And then, this is the warning required from the Food and Drug Administration in 1997. This is when it came in. Keep out of the reach of children under 6 years of age. If more than used for brushing, that's a pea-sized amount, is accidentally swallowed, get medical help or contact the Poison Control Center right away. Now, you're probably wondering then how much fluoride there is in a pea-sized amount of toothpaste at 1,000 parts per minute. Well, it's 1/4 milligram. Now, we fluoridate at 1 milligram per liter, approximately. So 1/4 milligram is in 1/4 liter. 1 milligram per liter, 1/4 milligram in 1/4 liter. 1/4 liter is 250 milliliters, which is 1 glass of water we're talking about. Now, I was at college with John Cleese. I played soccer with John Cleese, so a lot of his craziness is rubbed off on me. So forgive me, my humor sometimes gets in the way of my being portrayed as a serious scientist. But the science is good. But I have some fun at times, and this is one of them. Could you imagine what you would have to do in your kitchen if you were required by the FDA to do exactly the same warning as on this tube of toothpaste? Over your tap, you would have "do not swallow." And you would say, keep away from children under 6 years of age. And if you should accidentally swallow more than a glass of water, contact the Poison Control Center immediately. Amazing. This is the big surprise for many people when you actually read the literature, and most people don't, including the people in the health department that tell you it's safe and effective. They're not reading the primary literature. What they are reading is dummy reviews and second-hand material that gets fed down to them from Health Canada and the CDC and elsewhere. But if they actually read the literature, they would be astounded that the proponents' literature, not the opponents, but the proponents' literature, demonstrates that fluoridation is not very effective at reducing tooth decay. Let's have a look at some of this. First of all, let's compare countries, tooth decay in countries. Most countries don't fluoridate their water. Only about 30 countries in the world at any amount have any cities fluoridated. And only 8 countries have more than 50% of their population drinking fluoridated water. Those are Australia, Colombia, Ireland, Israel, Malaysia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the United States. Canada is less than 40% and falling. So you'll notice that most of these countries are English-speaking, and that this practice is largely pushed by Anglo-American. It's an Anglo-American phenomenon. And so they had easy takes in Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and elsewhere. Now, 98% of Western Europe now drinks non-fluoridated water. Some of these European countries started, like the Netherlands, like Switzerland, but stopped. And today, 98% don't fluoridate their water. Now, some fluoridate their salt. In Australia, Austria, France, Germany, and Switzerland. The majority neither fluoridate their water nor fluoridate their salt. You know, in Australia, their health agencies are even more arrogant than American and Canadian health agencies. And they just say the first thing off the top of their head. And when Australian citizens bring up the fact that most of Europe is not fluoridated, the answer that comes back is, oh, well, in Europe they don't have centralized water systems. Give me a break. They should visit Germany and Scandinavia and the Netherlands to see if they have centralized water systems. What a bunch of crap. This is coming off the top of their head and is a clear example of working backwards. For these people, it seems that it's now more important to protect this program than it is to protect the health of our people. And so they work backwards. So anything that threatens fluoridation, out comes this crap from their mouths. And there are many examples of it. And the other thing is, oh, they all fluoridate their salt. Well, only 4 of those countries fluoridate their salt. So the majority of European countries neither fluoridate their salt nor fluoridate their water. But guess what? Their tooth decay has been coming down as fast from the 60s to the present as the fluoridated countries. On this graph here, this is data from the World Health Organization that tracks tooth decay in 12-year-olds around the world. There's 4 countries which are fluoridated on that graph and 14 that are unfluoridated. Can you tell the difference? And if you go to the end, if you go to the figures at around 2000, you can see there's a great cluster. You cannot tell the difference in tooth decay in 12-year-olds whether that 12-year-old has grown up in a fluoridated country or a non-fluoridated. There's 4 countries which are fluoridated on that graph and 14 that are unfluoridated. Can you tell the difference? And if you go to the end, if you go to the figures at around 2000, you can see there's a great cluster. You cannot tell the difference in tooth decay in 12-year-olds whether that 12-year-old has grown up in a fluoridated country or a non-fluoridated country. Look at this. If we compare US states, these are the US states, 50 of them, in order of the percentage of the population drinking fluoridation. So at this end here, here, 1, that's the state of Hawaii that has very little fluoridation outside the army camps. And at the other end, you've got the District of Columbia, which is 100% fluoridated. And in between, you've got percentages ranging from 10 to, say, 90%. Now, our Department of Health and Human Services issued a questionnaire which went out to 50 states. And one of the questions on that questionnaire was, do your children have very good or excellent teeth? And here's the answer, yes, from families of low income. This is the answer, yes. My child has very good or excellent teeth. It's flat. Can you see a relationship? It's a rather noisy line, but can you see a relationship between the shape of that line and the shape of the other line? Does it bear any relationship to the percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water? I don't think so. It's even clearer with the families of high income. There you see it's flat, there's less noise. About 80% of those families throughout the United States said their children's teeth was very good or excellent. There's absolutely no relationship between those answers and the percentage of the state population drinking fluoridated water. But you can see a relationship there, can't you? You can see that tooth decay reflects poverty. The lower income that you have, the more likely that you're going to have poor teeth because of poor diet and other factors which go hand in hand with poverty. So that's the issue. And if you don't control for income levels, when you're comparing two towns, you can get any result that you want. If we compare US communities, this was the largest survey ever conducted in the United States. It cost the taxpayers nearly $4 million. They looked at the teeth of over 39,000 children in 84 communities. And what they found was that the average tooth decay for 5 to 17-year-olds, for children who'd always lived in non-fluoridated communities, it was 3.4 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. There are between 4 and 5 surfaces to a tooth. The top 6 cutting teeth, the bottom 6 cutting teeth have 4 surfaces. All the rest have 5 surfaces. So we're talking about less than 1 tooth with 3.4 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. If you look at children on the right who'd lived all their lives in a fluoridated community, it was 2.8 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. If we subtract those two, we see that the magnificent saving of this practice amounts to 0.6 of 1 tooth surface out of 128 tooth surfaces by the time all the teeth have erupted in a children's mouth. Now bear that in mind, that all the angst on fluoridation, all the concerns about the health effects, which I'm going to talk about later, are all going to happen in order to achieve a magnificent saving of 0.6 of 1 tooth surface. I would like to build a giant statue in Chicago at the headquarters of the ADA, which has a big tooth on it, and 0.6 of that tooth would be gold or platinum. And we could all go there and worship at the foot of this magnificent statue for saving us 0.6 of a tooth surface, whilst at the same time they probably damaged our bones, brains, and thyroid gland. But I'll get to that in a moment. Before we get to that, they didn't even publish the statistics on this. They didn't even demonstrate that this 0.6 was actually statistically significant, nor did they adjust for delayed eruption of teeth. It's thought, there's mixed studies on this, but it's thought by many that fluoride actually delays the eruption of teeth. And if you're looking at, say, a 6-year-old, and that 6-year-old in the fluoridated community has less teeth erupted, obviously you're going to have less tooth decay, right? And you've got to account for that. Well, when a gentleman down in Texas actually did adjust for that, he said, let's assume there's a 1-year delay. The curves are shifted over. There is no difference. If you allow for a 1-year delay in tooth eruption, there is no difference between those figures across the whole range, 5 to 17. But how many health risks would you take to save 0.6 of 1 tooth surface, which amounts to 1 filling? Or if you like, it's one tooth surface between 2 people. Studies in Australia have found even less saving than 0.6. One study done in 2 states, Queensland and Western Australia, found a saving of between 0.12 and 0.3 of one permanent tooth surface. So we'd have to have a different statute in Australia. But wait a minute, hold the statute for a moment, because a more recent study found no statistically significant difference in tooth decay in the permanent teeth between children in South Australia who had drunk fluoridated water all their lives and those who had drunk bottled water or tank water. And yet the authors of that study went on radio and recommended the addition of fluoride to bottled water. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. By the way, they're funded by Colgate, so that might explain part of this. There was a review of the literature done by David Locker, who sadly passed away last year, from the University of Toronto for the Ontario Ministry of Health. And he found that the magnitude of fluoridation's benefit was not large in absolute terms, is often not statistically significant, and may not be of clinical significance. And important recent studies. Now, there's a big study done in Europe by Connett, and he did control for the delayed eruption of teeth. And it's not difficult to do, by the way. You just divide the tooth decay by the number of teeth that have erupted. Okay, so you've normalized it per tooth. And he found no difference. No difference in tooth decay between the fluoridated kids and the fluoridated, non-fluoridated communities. And an even more recent study in 2009, a big study from Iowa, they measured tooth decay as a function of how much fluoride the kid had actually swallowed. They estimated how much the kid had swallowed from toothpaste, from water, and so on. And again, they found no relationship between tooth decay and the amount of fluoride ingested. But should we be surprised? No. We shouldn't be surprised, because they've already told us that it works topically. So why would we expect to find differences when people swallow fluoride in these communities? As I said, fluoridation should have ended in 1999. Now, I should say that all those studies that I have cited, all of them, were done by pro-fluoridation dental researchers. Not one single study that I've cited so far has been done by an opponent of fluoridation. It's their own studies indicate that fluoridation does not work. Or if the benefits are there, they're minuscule. And that's why I say that these people in the health department that go out like a broken gramophone record and say it's safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, haven't read the literature. They haven't even read the dental literature. Because if they had, they wouldn't do that. But I think the problem is that for the people in these health departments, which are in the middle level of bureaucracy, you don't challenge policy in the middle levels of bureaucracy. Policy is king. And if these people, these local people, were tomorrow to come out against fluoridation, they would lose their jobs. You can ask them. Ask Dr. Pollitt, how long would you hold your job if you were to tell the people of London that fluoridation was not safe or effective and should be stopped? He'd probably tell you, I'd probably last one day. So he's just obeying orders. I've heard that somewhere before. Okay, let's get on with the adequate. There is no adequate margin of safety. These are three words you'll never hear come out of the mouths of people that are pro-fluoridation. Margin of safety. They know that fluoridation is dead the moment you do a margin of safety calculation, and that will become clear as we go through the following. Now, the harmful effects of fluoride were documented in this study that was published in 2006. It's a 507-page study. It was conducted in the United States. It took 3.5 years. It was conducted by the first balanced panel ever selected to look at fluoridation and fluoride. Actually, they looked at fluoride's toxicity, not fluoridation per se, but fluoride in drinking water. They had people on this panel who were pro-fluoridation, people on this panel that were anti-fluoridation, and the majority had never taken a position. They expected to take 1 year on this. It took them 3.5 years. It is the most comprehensive study conducted to date anywhere in the world on fluoride's toxicity. I have the great pleasure to tell you that I was the only anti-fluoridation scientist that was invited to give testimony in person to this panel. They gave me 45 minutes immediately after the Center of Disease Control. I'm happy also to tell you that most of what I told them, and I've been telling communities around the world, has worked its way into this report. All the papers that I cited are now cited in here, so I was not so very far off mark. Now, in this report, again, let's be clear about this. I'm talking now about the harmful effects of fluoride, not necessarily the harmful effects of fluoridation. That will come later. They found that fluoride causes dental fluorosis. They knew that. Everybody's known that since 1931, that fluoride causes dental fluorosis. More about that in a moment. Secondly, it causes brain damage. Thirdly, it lowers thyroid function. Fourthly, it accumulates in the human pineal gland and lowers melatonin production in animals. It causes bone damage. It may cause osteosarcoma, which is a frequently fatal bone cancer in young men. So fluoridation may actually be killing people. Not many, but how many teeth would you have to save to justify one child dying of osteosarcoma? Maybe Dr. Pollack will tell us that. Some people are very sensitive to very low levels of fluoride. Okay, so let's go through some of these. Dental fluorosis. The early promoters of fluoridation thought that at 1 part per million fluoride, they could limit dental fluorosis to 10% of children, but only in its very mild form, a form that was so mild, little white opaque patches on the cusp of the teeth, that only dentists would be able to recognize this. And they thought that was a trade-off. We reduce tooth decay, but we wouldn't cause too much dental fluorosis. Well, let's look at the figures from that same massive review by the National Institute of Dental Research. Nearly 30% of kids in fluoridated communities in the United States had dental fluorosis. This is in 86, 87, reported in 97. Now you also see that over 20% in communities less, in non-fluoridated communities, between 0.3 and 0.7, this is natural fluoride, and communities less than 0.3 were getting 13.5% dental fluorosis. And if you break down the figures, look at the yellow line there, 22.5% were very mild, that's category 1, 5.8% were mild, and 1.3% were moderate. And thank goodness none were severe. And remember, they only wanted 10% in its very mild form. Now, this is what it looks like. Very mild ranges from little white patches on the cusp of the teeth up to 25% of the tooth surface impacted. That's one at one range. That's up to 25% impacted. Mild, notice the words, by the way, mild is up to 50% impacted with these opaque white patches. And moderate impacts 100% of the tooth surface, and this impacts over 1 in 100. It not only impacts 100% of the tooth surface, it tends to get discolored and with indentations. And amongst other things, that causes psychological damage. That's 25% impacted. Mild, notice the words, by the way, mild is up to 50% impacted with these opaque white patches. And moderate impacts 100% of the tooth surface, and this impacts over 1 in 100. It not only impacts 100% of the tooth surface, it tends to get discolored and with indentations. And amongst other things, that causes psychological damage to teenagers who don't want to smile or talk on their first date. Now, it turns out that the first year of life is the worst year for exposure to fluoride as far as developing dental fluorosis. And that's what prompted, on November of 2006, the American Dental Association, in an e-gram to its members, said, this is what they should advise parents: if using a product that needs to be reconstituted, parents and caregivers should consider using water that has no or low levels of fluoride. That's their advice. But they didn't get this warning to parents. And nobody is getting this warning to parents in the agencies which promote fluoridation. Nobody in Health Canada is taking steps to warn parents in London or any other fluoridated community that they shouldn't be using tap water to make up baby formula. Nor has anybody worked out what you're going to do with low-income families that can't afford bottled water. So look at what happened. We tried to get this warning. In the New Hampshire legislature, we tried to get legislation which would require water departments in fluoridated communities to put this warning on the water bills. Your water is fluoridated. Parents should not use tap water to make up baby formula. We tried to get their warning to parents. And guess what? The American Dental Association and its representatives in New Hampshire jumped all over this. They prevented this legislation from going through. And that's what gives is another example of working backwards. For them, it's more important to protect the water fluoridation program than it is to protect our babies, at least from developing dental fluorosis. They won't let us take their warning and get it to parents. And one of the things that you should think of doing in London, whilst you're waiting to get fluoride out of the water, that's clearly the goal that hopefully you'll all have by the time you leave here this evening. But in the interim, get the council to get the water department to put that warning on the water bills. It gets worse. A few weeks ago, the Centers for Disease Control announced that 41% of children aged 12 to 15 in the United States now have dental fluorosis. That the figures have leapt upwards. They've gone from very mild, from 17 to 28.5%. From mild, it's gone doubled, 4.1 to 8.6%, and moderate and even now serious, severe, up to 3.6%. It's a crisis. And the end result of this is that on January the 7th, the CDC announced that they're lowering the recommended level of fluoride in water. Not nearly enough, but it's a start. What about Canada? We do not have a nationwide survey of dental fluorosis in Canada. I mean, we've known from the moment you started fluoridation in Brantford in 1945. We have known, you have known, that fluoride causes dental fluorosis. And yet you're flying blind. You haven't got a systematic, comprehensive review of dental fluorosis rates in the different provinces and the different towns of Canada. And I ask you, why not? That's a pretty basic thing. Because one of the things you should be doing is to use the severity of dental fluorosis as a biomarker of exposure so that you could see if any of these childhood complaints that we're worried about, attention deficit syndrome, early onset of puberty, bone fractures, lowered IQ, etc., have any relationship to fluoridation. And you've got a measure that tells you how much fluoride the kid's been exposed to before their permanent teeth have erupted. And you're not using it. You're not doing the studies. But for that matter, you're not doing any health studies in Canada. The key question, this is the key question. When fluoride is damaging the baby's growing tooth cells by some internal mechanism, interfering with enzymes or what have you, what's it doing to the other developing tissues? This is what Arvid Carlson, some of you who here saw the videotape at the beginning. He won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2000. He's a neuropharmacologist. He designs drugs to get into the brain to do good things. And he led the successful campaign to keep fluoridation out of Sweden in the 1970s. And this is one of the arguments he used in 1978. One wonders what an increase in the exposure to fluoride, such as occurs in bottle-fed infants, may mean for the development of the brain and the other organs. The baby should not be exposed to fluoride up to 250 times the level of fluoride that occurs in mother's milk. The brain is very, very sensitive tissue. It's not fully protected at birth. Now, this is the National Research Council. It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. There have now been over 100 animal experiments which shows that fluoride can damage the brain. There have been 24 published studies from China, Iran, India, and Mexico indicating that moderate exposure to fluoride, naturally occurring fluoride, is associated with lowered IQ in children. And I want to tell you about one of those studies because we've got them all listed on our webpage and they're all listed in our book. I want to tell you about one study because I had the opportunity to go to China and visit the 2 villages where this study was conducted. One village, the well water, the fluoride levels were less than 0.7 parts per million, and in the other village, the levels were between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million. Now, when I visited those villages, what was remarkable about them is how similar they were in every respect. The housing was the same. The occupations were the same. They're all rural farmers. The education system was the same. The diet was the same. Everything that you could think, the lifestyle was the same. Rural farmers. The only thing, the big difference was this level of fluoride in their well water. In a way, it was an ideal place for an epidemiological study. But they also controlled for lead exposure. There was no difference in the lead exposure, and there was no difference in iodine uptake. It's important because both of those can interfere with IQ. Now, they found that across the whole age range, IQ was lowered by 5 to 10 IQ points. There was a complete shift in the curve of IQ. So there were fewer geniuses in the high fluoride village and more mentally handicapped children in the village with the high fluoride doses. Not that high notes, 2.5 to 4.5. And Zhang estimated that the threshold was 1.9 parts per million. That's when you see the lowering of IQ begin. Now, this is where the margin of safety argument comes in big time. If the fluoride is associated with the lowering of IQ of children, 1.9 parts per million, in a small population, there's about 300 kids in that village, the 2.5 to 4.5 parts per million. Now think about it. Those kids are all Chinese, fairly stable population, so a pretty homogeneous gene pool there. Now, what have you got to do if you're a regulator and you know that harm is occurring at 1.9? You've got to have a margin of safety to protect the whole population. And the whole population is not Chinese coming from one village. The whole population is many different nationalities in Canada, many different health status, many different sensitivities. You have to assume at least a range of sensitivity to any toxic substance, at least a factor of 10. A factor of 10. In other words, you have to assume that in your whole population that some children are going to be 10 times more sensitive to the endpoint, to this toxic substance, than the other children. 10 times. So in order to find a dose which is protective of the whole population, you have to have a margin of safety of 10. Okay? Margin of safety of 10. A safety factor of 10. Now I'm going to make the calculation a little simplified by, let's assume that all those children are drinking just 1 litre of water a day. Now 1.9 parts per million is 1.9 milligrams per litre. And if they're all drinking 1 litre, then this dose that's causing harm is 1.9 milligrams per day. So now let's divide that by 10. And so the safe dose, which we're establishing in order to protect Every child in Canada, from possible brain damage from drinking fluoridated water, is 0.19 milligrams per day. That's 1.9 divided by 10. That is standard toxicological procedure. This is the standard stuff that you do in any risk assessment for a toxic substance. I've done it myself umpteen times. I've taught my students how to do this umpteen times. We did this umpteen times for health risk assessments conducted for incinerators. 0.19 milligrams of fluoride is less than half a glass of water. So to protect the whole population of Canadian children, you don't want them drinking more than half a glass of water, of fluoridated water. Obviously, that's not happening. So you've got, please put up your hand if you understand what I've just taken you through. There is no margin of safety to protect all of Canada's children from lowering of IQ caused by fluoride based upon this Chinese study. And it's not just one study, it's 24 studies. Now, it's possible that you can find things wrong with the methodology, and that's normally what they try to do. But if that methodology is sound, then you're not protecting your children from brain damage from drinking fluoridated water. And since then, there have been 2 more studies that are very important. There's a study from Mexico which showed a very clear association between visual spatial learning and fluoride exposure, which is part of the brain development. And this one, look at this one. This is still online. It hasn't actually occurred yet in print, but it's online in the Journal of Hazardous Materials. They found a lowering of IQ in communities where the average water was 1.3 parts per million and the range was 0.3 to 3 parts per million. And their conclusions: overall, our study suggested that low levels of fluoride exposure in drinking water had negative effects on children's intelligence, and the results also confirmed the dose-response relationship between urine fluoride concentrations and IQ scores. Now, this is good. What they did here, by they're looking at urine levels, they brought this closer to individual exposure. You've eliminated the notion of how much water the kids have drunk, because you know from the level of fluoride in their urine how much they've been exposed to. And this level of fluoride in their urine correlates with the lowering of IQ. There's the graph. So as the fluoride levels in the water goes up, so the IQ levels come down. And they actually quote this figure: an increase in the urine fluoride concentration of 1 milligram per liter is associated with a decrease of 0.59 IQ scores. 0.59 for each 1 milligram. But, of course, in Canada you're okay, because no one's measuring the fluoride in the urine of your children, so we have no need to worry about that. 0.5 for each 1 milligram. But, of course, in Canada you're okay, because no one's measuring the fluoride in the urine of your children, so we have no need to worry about that. Now, there's 2 preposterous notions here. What parent in their right mind would put their children's teeth above their brains? And secondly, what government would support a program aimed at lowering tooth decay by at most 0.6 of one tooth surface if it lowered the IQ of the population by even a small amount? It's a preposterous notion to entertain, and yet we have to entertain that. Or we have to entertain an atrocious lack of due diligence. That whilst individual scientists like myself can find out and read these papers, apparently it's beyond the expertise of Health Canada to read these papers or to take them seriously. Health Canada has not conducted a single IQ study in Canada. Next subject. Several lines of information indicate an effect of fluoride exposure on thyroid function. You know, doctors in Europe and Argentina in the 30s, 40s and 50s used to give fluoride tablets to people with overactive thyroid glands to lower the activity of the thyroid glands. And in 1985, in the Ukraine, Baginski and co-workers found a lowering of thyroid function in people drinking water at 2.3 parts per million. And again, no margin of safety. Now, if fluoride lowers thyroid function, it could explain the delayed eruption of teeth, it could explain the lowered IQ in children, and it would explain this massive increase that we have in hypothyroidism among US citizens and Canadians and North America. You know, we have something like between 20 and 40 million Americans with hypothyroidism. And the symptoms, depression, lethargy, tiredness, not relieved by sleep, obesity. And yet, in Health Canada has not conducted a single study to examine a possible relationship between exposure to fluoridated water and hypothyroidism. They're just not looking. And yet this is very serious. It's one of the diseases that Pam was talking about, these debilitating diseases. Fluoride and bone. The first symptoms of fluoride's damage to the bone, about 50% of the fluoride, all the fluoride that we can ingest each day from toothpaste, from water, from food, etc., pesticides, accumulates in our bone, about 50%. And the concentrations in our bone continue to increase over a lifetime. And the first symptoms that fluoride is damaging the bone is that you get stiffness in the joints, pains in the joints, pains in the bones. And these are identical to arthritis. And in America, we have 1 in 3 Americans now with arthritis. And if you ask a doctor, "Doc, I've got arthritis, what's the cause of that?" And he will say, or she will say, "We don't really know, but we think it's got something to do with aging." Well, could it possibly be the aging in whether you've lived in a fluoridated community for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, or what have you? Once again, Health Canada has not conducted a single study to examine a possible relationship between exposure to fluoridated water and arthritis. They're not even measuring fluoride in bone to get a handle on this, or fluoride in the urine, as I've already mentioned. Now, what we're also concerned about is that it makes the bones more brittle. And the bone that we're concerned about breaking in elderly people is this bone which joins the hip bone to the pelvis. And when that breaks, it's very serious for an elderly person, because you have to immobilize the patient when you're trying to mend this break. And that, by the time the elderly person has been immobilized for 6 weeks, a couple of months, all their muscles have atrophied. They can't get mobility back. So 50% of elderly people that get that bone broken never regain an independent existence, and 25% are dead within a year of that break. And so if indeed fluoride contributed to the breaking of that bone, it will be incredibly serious. And the studies are mixed. There are some studies which shows that fluoride, that people in fluoridated areas have higher hip fracture rates than non-fluoridated areas, and we have other studies which show the opposite. But this is the most important study as far as I'm concerned. This is a study conducted by an American group from Loma Linda University in China. And again, they used the same approach. Very stable Chinese population, everything very similar except for the level of fluoride in the water. And you've got these 6 villages in which the fluoride levels are increasing steadily. And if you compare the hip fracture rates with the village at 1 part per million, that's village 3, you'll see that the hip fracture rates double for villages 4 and 5, and they triple for village 6. And at village 6, that is statistically significant. Now, there's 2 interpretations of this data, okay? If you're pro-fluoridation, you only accept village 6 because it's the only one with statistical significance. And so the assumption for the people that are pro-fluoridation is that no effect is on hip fracture until your levels in the water goes up to about 4 parts per million, which in this context was about 14 milligrams of fluoride a day. and then suddenly it triples. The threshold, it suddenly goes from no change to tripling. Opponents of fluoridation say that's unreasonable. We think it's more reasonable that what we're looking at is a trend here. It may not have reached statistical significance, but we think that trend is real. In which case, hip fractures may be increasing as low as 3 milligrams a day, which is easily achieved. If you drink 3 litres of water a day, you're going to get 3 milligrams. I was in Western Australia a couple of weeks ago, and I met somebody in the mining industry, and he told me that the miners there drink between 10 and 12 litres of water a day. And I can tell you that those miners are going to wreck their bones after 10, 20 years drinking that water, which they have to drink because it's so darn hot in those mines. Now, fluoride may cause osteosarcoma. This is a very interesting case where we can see the clash between science and politics. In 2001, Dr. Elise Bassin, a dentist, successfully had defended her doctoral thesis at Harvard University. She found in an excellent study, a matched case control study, that if young boys were exposed to fluoridated water in their 6th, 7th or 8th years, by the way, this corresponds to the mid-childhood growth spurt, it's when the bones are turning over fast, had a 5 to 7-fold increase in developing osteosarcoma by the age of 20, compared to children that were not exposed to fluoride in this same period. So they looked as if there was a window of vulnerability. Now her boss, this is the politics, Chester Douglas, who is a consultant for Colgate, who actually edited their weekly report, who is a known promoter of fluoridation, who actually co-authored a paper which made it very clear indeed, that if there was a relationship between fluoridation and osteosarcoma, it would be the end of fluoridation, which he lamented because it was so good for children's teeth. Anyway, so his position was very clear. Promoter of fluoridation. Between 2001 and 2005, he had at least 3 opportunities to warn the public, to warn his peers, to warn the regulatory agencies that his graduate student had found that finding. He did not do so. He went to England in 2002 and he spoke before the British Fluoridation Society, and he said, my studies show no relationship between osteosarcoma and fluoridation. And he somehow forgot to mention his graduate student's work. He was asked to present a written statement on his work to the National Research Council, and again he said, my work shows no relationship between osteosarcoma and fluoridation. This time he put Bassin's thesis as a footnote, but he didn't tell them that the footnote contradicted what he was telling them. Well, run the clock forward. In 2006, in 2005, my son, Michael, found this thesis in the rare book section of the Harvard Library and sent the chapter which dealt with this study to the National Research Council and also to the Environmental Working Group, who then tipped off the press, and it was a big scandal. It was covered in the Wall Street Journal, in the Washington Post, and on Fox TV. And the EWG called for an investigation of Chester Douglas, but Harvard did the investigation, and they exonerated this professor. He didn't knowingly, get that, he didn't knowingly conceal his graduate students' work from anyone. Doddering old twit, I suppose we have to assume. Anyway, in 2006, she published her work with 3 other co-authors in Cancer Causes and Control. And Douglas, who up to this point has proceeded with the speed of a castrated snail, suddenly springs into action, and in the same issue of the journal puts in a letter telling people not to take her work too seriously because he was going to publish a study which showed that this relationship didn't hold in the larger study. And he promised this study for the summer of 2006, and we're still waiting for Chester Goddo Douglas to produce this study. But meanwhile, Health Canada, the Australian National Health and Medical Research Council, and other health agencies in promoting the fluoridating countries have used this promise of a study which has not been peer-reviewed or published to negate Bassin's findings. It's outrageous. Health Canada is doing that. Yeah, we're still waiting. The promotion of fluoridation is unprofessional and unscientific. This is from a white paper from the American Dental Association. Individual dentists must be convinced that they need not be familiar with scientific reports of laboratory and field investigations on fluoridation to be effective participants in the promotion program, and that non-participation is overt neglect of professional responsibility. Can you imagine any other profession in the world telling its membership you don't have to be knowledgeable of the literature to go out there and promote something, which may actually be killing people, by the way? You can imagine engineers. We're going to build a wonky old bridge over here. And if you don't go out there and tell the public that this bridge is really sound, it's overt neglect of your professional response. I mean, it's just bizarre. Monty Python, where are you? Okay. For over 60 years, the fluoridation debate has been controlled largely by the dental profession. This profession has a single focus on teeth, with little or no expertise on other health issues. This is how they see us. Mouths with little legs on. You know, that's it. They just see a hole. The teeth! The teeth! The teeth! We've got to protect the teeth! The teeth! The teeth! The teeth! To hell with the kidneys, to hell with the lungs, to hell with the brains, to hell with the kidneys. We've got to protect the teeth! There has been no formal investigation of the many anecdotal reports that some individuals are highly sensitive to fluoride, gastrointestinal, neurological and skin conditions, even though people have volunteered to be guinea pigs if the government would attempt to put this on a scientific level. But there has been no formal investigation of the many anecdotal reports that some individuals are highly sensitive to fluoride, gastrointestinal, neurological and skin conditions, even though people have volunteered to be guinea pigs if the government would attempt to put this on a scientific level. But Canada has not attempted to do that. If you don't look, you don't find. The absence of studies does not mean the absence of harm. Now, this is another episode of Monty Python. It came to us on April the 1st. It was either 2007 or 2008. I can't remember which. But I was there. I was in the audience. And it was videotaped, so there's no doubt about what happened. Dr. Peter Cooney, the Chief Dental Officer of Canada, told an audience in Dryden, and I'll try to get the accent right. He said, I walked down your high street today, and I didn't see anyone growing horns, and you've been fluoridated for 40 years. Now, I have this vision of Health Canada. It has a huge department there of horn specialists. There are cow horn specialists, bull horn specialists, deer horn specialists, even moose horn specialists. And these gentlemen and ladies are going across Canada, looking everywhere to see if there are any horns growing out of our heads. And if they don't find any horns growing out of our heads, then they rightfully conclude that fluoridation is safe. And that's the level of expertise of your Chief Dental Officer of Canada. I think it's clear from what I've said that the science indicates that fluoridation should be ended. Go to our webpage, fluoridealert.org. You'll find a huge health database. Go there and see the videotape. There are 200. Somebody has very kindly donated 200 copies of this DVD. You're invited to get, for a small donation, to get this DVD. It's 28 minutes long. Some of you saw it at the beginning. 15 scientists, including the Nobel Prize winner, Arvid Carlsson, 3 authors of the National Research Council report, 2 scientists who worked for the EPA. One of them was a health risk assessment specialist. Two dentists who had previously been pro-fluoridation but have changed their position. By the way, I know of many prominent promoters of fluoridation who, after reading the literature, have changed their position to an anti-fluoridation position. I know of nobody that is anti-fluoridation that has read anything which has persuaded them to be pro-fluoridation. So basically, if someone is pro-fluoridation, it's pretty clear evidence that they haven't read the literature. Then there's this, this is the videotape that I just talked about, but also on the video, on the web page, you will find that now we have 3,600 professionals from around the world, dentists, nurses, pharmacists, veterinarians, dental hygienists, lawyers, architects, all kinds of professionals have signed this statement calling for an end to fluoridation worldwide. And we've had to do that. We've had to do that because they insist that people like myself who oppose fluoridation are a bunch of Looney Tunes. That we get all our science, it's all junk science, we get it from the internet, all this kind of stuff. And we've got to convince them that no, it's intelligent people who read the literature who are opposed to fluoridation. And now we have... And now we have the book. I urge you to read this book. Get your library to get it. You don't have to pay. I'm not here to sell anything. I'm not here to make money. I don't charge for anything I do on this stuff. I said to my wife, after this was published, now after 14 years, I said, Ellen, it feels like I've been constipated for 14 years. And they just allowed me to have a crack. And she said, don't say that. Don't say that. They think the book's a load of you-know-what. No, it isn't a load of you-know-what. But I feel that we've done our job. The three of us, the biologist, the physicist, and the chemist, we've done our job. We've read the literature, we've thought about it, we've summarized everything, we've made our arguments absolutely crystal clear, we've documented every single fact. We've outlined our case in detail, we've documented everything. Now we need the US and Canadian health authorities to do their job. And as far as London is concerned, it's time for your health officials to do their job. And it's as simple as this. They could do it in two ways. Dr. Pollard, I don't want to be personal, I've never met this guy, I'm sure he's a very nice person. Okay, but he's got a job to do. His job is to promote fluoridation. If he doesn't, he's going to lose his job. But basically, there's two things that he can do. One is to read the National Research Council report very thoroughly, and then state whether in his professional judgment there's an adequate margin of safety to protect all Canadians from the health effects documented in this book. I think he's going to find it very difficult to tell the truth and say that there's an adequate margin of safety. But let's see what he has to say on that. But that's what he has to do. He can't just blow this off. He's got to say, if he wants to continue promoting fluoridation, he has to say that there's an adequate margin of safety to protect everyone. I don't think he can say that scientifically. Maybe he will have to say it politically. And the second thing that they have to do, and Mrs. Washowski, what's her name? Washkowski? Yeah, Washkowski. She was saying that fluoridation was safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective on radio. Her job is to read this book. She says she's reading it. And I want to hear a scientific response from her. I want to see where we're wrong. I want her to tell me why the evidence that we produce is wrong. And if she can't do that, then she cannot keep telling you that fluoridation is safe and effective. She just can't be allowed to do that. They've got to admit that fluoridation was a huge mistake, and they must stop it now. And the good news is now coming up. The support for fluoridation is crumbling. Recent events, I told you that January the 7th, they've lowered the optimal levels. January the 10th, The EPA Pesticide Division said they've accepted all our objections to the use of sulfuryl fluoride as a fumigant on food, which left residues of fluoride. They said we're going to phase this out over the next 3 years because children in America are already overexposed to fluoride. In Canada, less than 40% of Canada is now fluoridated. Most of British Columbia has stopped. Most of Quebec has stopped. That happened when Quebec City stopped in April of 2008 after 36 years. Over 90% of Quebec is no longer fluoridated. 3 towns in the Niagara region of Ontario stopped fluoridation in 2008. Dryden, Ontario voted out fluoridation in 2008 after hearing Dr. Peter Cooney. And Waterloo, Kitchener, and I see Robert Fleming. Stand up, Robert, stand up. Stand up. This man, this man put so much of his own personal money and so much of his time to defeat fluoridation in Waterloo, Kitchener. I was nearly killed, by the way. I was nearly killed. I was trying to find his office, and I was being driven by somebody else, and we'd been looking for his office. And all of a sudden, we saw this gigantic sign, "Vote no to fluoridation." We were so excited, we went straight across the intersection of the road. Just missed the oncoming traffic. That was very, very exciting. And I shouldn't mention Robert Fleming without mentioning another hero from this area, along with Pam, of course, is a great hero of all of us. And that's Carol Clinch, who's done fantastic work, really hounding Canadian health authorities and all the ridiculous illegalities of their promotion of fluoridation. So Carol Clinch, are you in the audience? I don't see her, but when you see her, give her a big hug. Okay. Calgary, Alberta Council voted 10-3 to end fluoridation after 20 years in February. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but my co-author, James Beck, led the fight against that for years and years and years. And he used this book. This book was the final punch to persuade those councillors to stop fluoridation. So that's a good omen for this book, right? One of the co-authors has already stopped. Now, in the United States, the latest communities, we got about at least 100 that have stopped. Independence, Virginia, Yellow Springs, Ohio, Schuylkill, Haven, Pennsylvania, stopped relatively recently. In January 2000, this is exciting, Peter Vallone Jr., a councilman, chairman of one of the council committees, introduced a bill to end fluoridation in New York City. If New York City goes, that is America. So this is it. It's going to be tough. We're up against a lot of heavy hitters down there who are determined to keep it in fluoride in New York City, but at least it's a beginning. And for a complete listing of communities that have stopped, you can find them on our webpage. You can find, just look for communities that have stopped fluoridation. But there have been some setbacks. In February of 2011, they fluoridated San Diego. That's a lot of people, 2 or 3 million people. That's pretty darn sad. And just yesterday, I repeated this thing to get that. Okay. Yesterday, all my troubles. On March the 1st, the Arkansas legislature voted to introduce statewide mandatory fluoridation. We only heard about it 2 or 3 days ago when it was coming out of the committee. It went from the committee, it was voted on by the whole Senate the next day, and then the next working day, the House voted it in, this legislation. Incredible. And this is work all behind the scenes by PR operatives, big budget, and the dental director of Arkansas, working, smooching around with all the legislators, and before the public knew anything about it, they've got mandatory fluoridation in Arkansas. And they did this with Louisiana a couple of years ago, and I suspect we're going to see a whole series of southern states fall over like dominoes. Because whilst we can take them on one community at a time, when you try to fluoridate a community and people get upset, the media starts getting interested, you get a debate, you get both sides, and if people hear both sides and the press does a half-decent job, then the people will not vote for it. But we are not strong enough, and we don't have their kind of money to beat them at the lobbying game in these capitals, these state capitals. So this is pretty ominous, what is happening there. And that makes it even more important that London, Ontario follows Waterloo's example. We need more and more cities like Waterloo, like Calgary, hopefully like London, to stop. And trust me, in going around Australia, in Perth, in New South Wales, in Victoria, everybody knew about Calgary. Everybody knew about Calgary. Everybody knew about Waterloo. These victories go around the world so quickly with internet and emails. They're all celebrating there. And particularly the people in Perth, that you like this, Robert, the people in Perth said, you know, we feel quite an affinity for Calgary. We're very similar economy. Very similar. We're a resource-based economy. We're also quite away from the centre in Perth, from the rest of Australia, from the government in Canberra. And so they feel they've got a good shot of copying Calgary in Perth. So please don't underestimate what we can do. But don't forget, the first thing we've got to do is to get those warnings. Get those warnings on the water bill. No parent should unjustifiably, unnecessarily expose their babies to fluoridated water, tap water. Let's get the warnings on the bill. And again, it's not the most important issue, but I absolutely assure you that this is the easiest issue to end, to stop, once we have the political will. Once we have the political will, it's just, that's all you need. Like a big hand, just turn off that spigot at the waterworks and it's all over. And they've done that in Waterloo. They've turned off the spigot and it's all over. And isn't it great, Robert, to be able to go downtown, drink any water that you want, any cup of coffee that you want, go to work and you can drink it, because that's what happened to us in Canton, New York. It took us 7.5 years, but we got it out of our town. It's all over. And isn't it great, Robert, to be able to go downtown, drink any water that you want, any cup of coffee that you want, go to work and you can drink it, because that's what happened to us in Canton, New York. It took us 7.5 years, but we got it out of our town. So I know what it's like to be able to drink the water once you've got it out. So it's a very exciting thing. So please, we've done the first thing is to inform the people, educate the people. We've done the job, I think. We've done it with our webpage, we've done it with our videotapes, we've done it now with this book. We're doing it and continuing to do it with these presentations. Please go out, tell your friends, tell your neighbours, phone your council members, tell them that you're concerned, tell them to do their homework, and get it out of London. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. That's lovely. Now, we're going to have some questions, and please, I do hope there's some people in the audience that are for fluoridation. Please don't be intimidated. No, don't, please. Don't be intimidated. This is a democracy, and democracies depend upon open debate and not being intimidated. We know what it's like to be intimidated when we're the only person in the room that believes something. And it's easy to be put down. So if you're for fluoridation, don't hesitate to ask a tough question.
We have a microphone down here at the front. So I see some people very anxious to ask questions. Why don't we start right ahead? Go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Lauren Keith, and I actually took the City of London to court for fluoridation. They spent $17,000 to fight me. What I found out was I lost 25 pounds because they did something to the water. I just found out that they were doping the water with P2O5 acid, which is part of the phosphate fertilizer. So when they put it down to 0.01%. And then they turned around and they raised it up. They raised it up to 0.2%, which is a 20-fold increase, and actually put on weight. So it went down to like 242 pounds from 275, and then they started putting it up. It started increasing weight. And then this last summer, in August, I went for Freedom of Information, and the information I wanted, they wouldn't refuse some of it, said it was lost. But if anyone lost about 10 pounds during August, that's the reason.
Yeah.
The other thing is, when I took them to court, I suffered bronchitis. On the MSDS that they have for hydrochloric acid, they say it causes bronchopneumonia.
Yeah.
When they put it in the water, they said they started September the 1st, 1967. They actually started 2 weeks early. And that's when I got sick. I took them to court over it, and I had to leave London and move to Vancouver because I had so many cases of bronchitis. It was the only way to get over it.
Yeah. Well, let me tackle two of those things. One of the things which some people that are sensitive to fluoride, and I've met them, is asthma. That some people that are sensitive to fluoride get asthmatic type conditions when they're exposed to fluoride. So the bronchitis fits into that, the respiratory problem. And secondly, I think the issue of phosphate, if I'm not mistaken, they add the phosphoric acid to the water to try to minimize the leaching of the lead. Lead phosphate is very insoluble, so they're trying to put a coating of lead phosphate on the pipes. That's what I believe what they're doing. So there is some rationale for doing that, but it's unfortunate what you've experienced there. The next question. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ryan. I'm from London here. I go to Western and think psychology.
Yes.
A lot of what you were saying was very good, and I know the systematic problems that go on about keeping this issue down. I haven't seen anything in my psychology books about fluoride yet, but I've always heard of it. The question I had about, on top of that kind of systematic thing is, you said that the dental industry was occupying pretty much the whole debate. I also heard that the aluminum industry was behind all of that as well. Like there's mercury, arsenic, and also basically the aluminum industry was getting their products out through Florida. But I didn't hear anything.
Now, there's a whole book, brilliant book, written about the beginnings of fluoridation. It's called The Fluoride Deception. It was written by Chris Bryson, who's a former BBC correspondent and producer. He spent 10 years writing this book, of The Fluoride Deception. And I've got a 28-minute interview with Chris Bryson on our homepage. You can watch the video online. And Chris documents the collusion between the US Public Health Service and these fluoride generating and polluting industries, Alcoa being very prominent. And in the beginning, the fluoride that was used to add to the water was actually sodium fluoride from the aluminum industry. At least some of it came from the aluminum industry. I don't think the aluminum industry today is selling their fluoride for water fluoridation purposes. But the thesis of Bryson was that in the 1930s, fluoride was perceived as the worst air pollutant, the most dangerous air pollutant from industry. It was produced by the ceramic industry, the glass industry, the oil industry, the steel industry, all the metal industries, including zinc, steel, aluminium, the phosphate fertilizer industry. And they knew after World War II the production of fluoride and production of their industries was going to shoot up, and that the fluoride pollution was going to increase. They already knew in the 30s that fluoride had done more damage to US agriculture than any other air pollutant. And so they were confronted with lawsuits from farmers. And what they skillfully did when they introduced water fluoridation is they changed the image of fluoride as a very nasty air pollutant into this nice cozy stuff that you could put on your cornflakes. and give to your kids. So that's one of the arguments he makes there. And what is very interesting today is that one of the groups which is vociferously pro-fluoridation is a group called the American Council on Science and Health, ACSH, headed up by Elizabeth Whalen. This is an industry-funded organization. They've never found a chemical that they didn't like. They are funded by industry. They're funded by all the industries we've mentioned already, all the fluoride-generating industries, and also the food industry. And they're very strong advocates of fluoridation. And methinks the fact that they're still around, and when Peter Vallone introduced the bill in New York City to remove fluoridation, who attacked him? The ACSH. So I think that these industries still have a concern about liabilities of lawsuits from their own workers who've been exposed to fluoride. So there's a lot of politics there, a lot of economics there. So worth reading the Fluoride Deception. Yeah.
I just have a couple of things. First of all, Professor Joe Cummins is in the audience tonight as well, and he's worked quite hard at reviewing the literature on the leaching of lead with fluoride present in the water. We don't have a lot of time to go over that issue, but Professor Cummins is here if anybody wants to talk to him after the event. Secondly, there's a gentleman who needs wheelchair access to get down to the microphone, and he says he can bellow very loud.
Bellow.
Let's give him a chance to ask his question.
Bellow, and I hope you don't have horns.
I heard once and read somewhere that fluoridation was used by Nazi Germany on human beings, and that was somewhat of an origin of that.
Don't go there. Please don't go there. There's nothing that the pro-fluoridation people would like more than us to go ranting around about Hitler and Stalin using fluoride in the concentration camps and the Stalin. First of all, we've got them on the ropes as far as the science is concerned. This would be the most beautiful escape. They escaped in the 50s. We had scientists, we had biochemists, we had Nobel Prize winners fighting fluoridation, and yet they were able to convert the opposition to the Ku Klux Klan, the John Birch Society, and then they made a movie called Dr. Strangelove, and we're all crazy people. And so they were able to convince the American public that the people against fluoridation were a bunch of wackos, right-wing nuts. That's the way they portrayed it. They could do the same again if we start ranting and raving about Hitler using it in the concentration camps. However, my wife and I checked this out. One of the groups we went to was the Wiesenthal Foundation. These are the people that track down Nazi killers, right? We asked them if they could find any evidence. They could not find any evidence. We think it's very unlikely. The Nazis were not ashamed or embarrassed about their human experiments. They were quite proud of what they were achieving by playing around with human beings. And so I think if they found a way of dumbing down the population using fluoride, they would have told us. It would have been documented. But there's no documentation. And there's all this study, all this stuff about Hitler using it comes down to one piece of information from a guy called Charles Perkins. That's the only documentation. It would not, trust me, it would not satisfy the historian. So please, don't go there for pragmatic reasons. There's another pragmatic reason not to use it. I do not think our enemy is our dentists or doctors. The enemy here is that those dentists and doctors are not reading the literature. That's the enemy. It's ignorance which is the enemy. The doctors and dentists... And I'm frightened that the moment you start talking about Hitler using fluoride, you're sort of implicating them in a horrendous plot, a very nasty plot. And I don't want to stigmatize dentists and doctors. And I think the problem for most of them is they're too darn busy treating patients to read the literature. And I have the time. I'm a retired professor. I can spend all my time on this issue. They can't. And the real problem is that they, despite not reading the literature, they are prepared, some of them, not all of them, Some of them are prepared to go on a public platform and say it's safe and effective when they haven't read the literature, and that's not good. So please, don't go there for pragmatic reasons. There's another pragmatic reason not to use it. I do not think our enemy is our dentists or doctors. The enemy here is that those dentists and doctors are not reading the literature. That's the enemy. It's ignorance which is the enemy. The doctors and dentists... And I'm frightened that the moment you start talking about Hitler using fluoride, you're sort of implicating them in a horrendous plot, a very nasty plot. And I don't want to stigmatize dentists and doctors. And I think the problem for most of them is they're too darn busy treating patients to read the literature. And I have the time. I'm a retired professor. I can spend all my time on this issue. They can't. The real problem is that they, despite not reading the literature, they are prepared, some of them, not all of them, some of them are prepared to go on a public platform and say it's safe and effective when they haven't read the literature, and that's not good. Yep, next one.
I agree, there is no reason to go there, to stick with the science.
Yes.
And science is really that simple. When we purchase water, all we're trying to purchase is H2O. We're not trying to purchase fluoride, chlorine, which actually comes in a bottle of sodium phosphorus lines with water with chlorine. My question is, though, will you purchase it? And I understand the city government just recently approved in London the fluoridation of the water. I saw on the news, and someone correct me if I'm wrong. And I want to know about the money, as a lot of us do, because we pay taxes here. Families done it for 4 generations. And I wanted to know, since we have councillors here this evening and some of the press, maybe some people here know correctly, how much money have we committed to spending on something that I didn't want to buy anything more than H2O? I want to know the exact amount.
For this year.
For this year, we committed
50,000?
150,000.
150,000.
138, 139, we did that right. That's what 138,000 last year.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and also the question, since they just approved it, now we're having this meeting post them approving it just 4 weeks, which we were here a month or two ago. What can we do to reverse that decision? What, we have to walk like the Egyptian on City Hall? I mean, what do we have to do?
Ask if Denise Brown wants to answer that question.
You know, reverse that. Is there a way to get it reversed?
Well, maybe some of the councillors here can give us some advice of what we can do. My experience is, if this kind of turnout takes place, I mean, it's huge, a standing room only of an audience that was at least 300 people here.
300, yeah.
Politicians are not blind to that. If they see that, and I found this with incineration too, Canadians are much more reasonable than Americans. When I found audiences of this size fighting incineration, the politicians very quickly recognized that the people didn't want incinerators and didn't pursue it. And I think the same thing is going to happen with your politicians. Despite what they've been told by the health department, if you make it very clear, very, very clear that you don't want this, they will get the message. They will find a way to stop this. I'm convinced of that.
No fluoride.
Yeah.
Just make sure you fill out your name and email on the registry that was going around as well, and you'll get some feedback from the fluoride, or from the people against, or people for safe drinking water, if they have to do some follow-up, some sort of plebiscite or petition.
Robert, you never got an audience this size in Waterloo, right?
No, Waterloo is a very conservative town, and very resistant to change.
Yeah.
Despite Jim being there, that's
Yeah. Okay.
get an audience.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay,
here,
5
yeah.
minutes, very quickly. Sorry, I've been long-winded. Quickly.
Hi, my name is Stefania, and I'm part of the Young Moms Group. And we had London Middlesex Health Unit coming to us and telling us that as we were pregnant and as we were having our children, they were telling us that we were not healthy people if we were not drinking 8 to 9 glasses of water a day.
Right.
Tap water, straight tap water. And she's telling us that our water is safe enough for us and our children. And even right now in my mom's group, you are told to give your child, right, from literally as soon as they are 6 months old, to give them either their infant formula, your breast milk, or straight water from the tap.
Yeah.
And they told me, I was telling my daughter, like, I don't give my daughter fluoridated water. And she told me there was not enough of fluoride in our water to do anything to my daughter, and I should be giving my 2-year-old daughter 3 little cups of water a day, or she's not going to be healthy.
Unfortunately, the people that give you this advice are just following advice that somebody else has given them, and they don't challenge it. So they need to do their homework. Please take this information and give it to them so they have it. Yes?
Hi there. I am from Oxford County, which is next door, and we're 100% groundwater dependent in Oxford County, so that's different from London that gets its water from the surface water source out of the lake. But we are part of the Thames Valley District School Board, which I think is the second largest school board in all of Canada. Our average fluoride intake naturally is 2.0 parts per million, and we have had no luck convincing the Thames Valley District School Board to even send out a notification to the parents that this exceeds drinking water standards for fully grown adults, never mind children that are in critical phases of development. Do you have any suggestions for...
Yeah, I definitely think your water board in particular must get that warning on the bill. And definitely in years to come, they're going to have to talk about removing the fluoride from your water. It's going to be expensive, but you're going to have to remove it. 2 parts per million is actually above the Canadian standard, which is 1.5 parts per million. So legally, they should remove it.
I think the problem is that as the current legislation is written for the province of Ontario, if it's a naturally occurring problem like what we have, there's nothing that needs to be done. So legally, the Thames Valley District School Board says you don't have to do anything, which they are confusing with it's safe for consumption.
Well, that may be the legal position, but it's absolute poppycock. The assumption that something's okay because it occurs naturally is lunacy. Arsenic occurs naturally, but we have Western states which are spending a fortune removing arsenic to get it down to the safe drinking water standard. So the same thing should apply with fluoride. You've got a drinking water standard of 1.5 parts per million, and if you've got over that, you should be required to remove it. So somebody needs to look at that law again. Next one.
I actually was going to comment on what the guy did earlier about, even if there's people in here who are convinced that fluoridation is bad for them, I'm sure everybody can be convinced that spending an extra $130,000 or $50,000 a year of our money to be paid for our water. I mean, we want a lower water bill for something that's not necessary. Something else is good. But you've always said that this is to benefit the metal industry, other industries. Like, who is actually, if they stop fluoridating London's water, who's actually going to lose their job first? Who's pushing to keep the fluoridation of the water? I don't understand.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody understands.
It's like this big cloud of people that's going to be losing money or something like that, but who actually is going to say, that can't happen because I need to get a job or something?
The motivations we left to the last chapter very, very quickly. I think that some entities are worried about liabilities. I think the toothpaste manufacturers are worried about liabilities. I think the dental associations that have promoted and put their seal of approval on dental products with fluoride in it, they're worried about liabilities. With the health departments, they're worried, the public health people are worried about credibility. Lose fluoridation, you lose credibility. Lose credibility, and you have to worry about other public health practices. That's, I think, what's motivating.
Okay, but you mentioned also that there's these big containers now. It's toxic waste. It's toxic waste now because they can't get rid of it.
Yep.
Where is that coming from, and now who's having to pay to get rid of it?
Yeah, it's the phosphate fertilizer industry.
It's the fertilizer industry that's at stake to have to pay now to get rid of this waste?
It is hazardous waste, no question about that. So if it's not used for drinking water, then they've got to find an industrial use for it, or they've got to contain it on site, or they've got to send it to a hazardous waste facility.
Okay, we're really
Yeah.
Isn't
that the council? No. No. Okay.
Hi, my name is Jay, and first off, I would like to say, am I interested in...
Louder, please.
purchasing one of your books, Addiction?
Addiction. I have a few copies tonight, yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
And also, I would like to mention that I've been living with hypothyroidism ever since I was 12, and I've always been aware of fluoridation, but recently I started to pay a lot of attention, and it could also explain, like, as to why, like, every time I have a glass of tap water now, like, shortly after my thyroid gland, it feels like there's a pressure upon it, and it can be painful.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more frequent as of recently, so I made a conscious decision to completely just cut out tap water. Like, before, I never really cared. I wasn't really that concerned, but now it's starting to take its toll on me. So, yeah.
Well, it's a pity that Health Canada is not interested in you or people like you, because they should be. They should be. They should at least investigate this scientifically and not leave people like you to sink or swim, depending on their own devices. This is their practice. They're putting fluoride in the water. They may be damaging your thyroid gland. They should take responsibility, but they're not.
I think this is going to be our last
Oh,
question.
this is the last question.
Yeah,
I'm
I don't think
afraid,
we have to.
because we.
You have to do your book signing.
I have
Yeah.
to do book signing. Oh my goodness.
I just want to say there'd be no safety in just going with bottled water either, since there could be municipal water mixed in with bottled water anyway, so you're not safe there either. But I know you're not a professional, someone involved in the health industry that way, but based on your knowledge, should London get swayed a lot by money issues? So should North America remove fluoridization right across the board? What would you anticipate the percentage of a decrease in health budgets for both Canada and the United States if fluoride was removed entirely? I know, say per year.
It could be enormous. It could be enormous. Let's do the easy ones. The symptoms of fluoride, arthritis, the amount of money that's spent on painkillers to treat arthritis, if that's exacerbated by fluoride, that's a huge money saver right there. Hypothyroidism. The second most prescribed drug in the United States is Synthroid, which is for hypothyroidism. Again, if fluoride is contributing to that, and you stop fluoridation, then that would save a huge amount of money. But I think the big one is, because we took the eye off the prize in the 1940s by putting our money on fluoridation instead of education, and we gave out the message to parents, don't worry about reducing sugar consumption because you've got fluoride to protect your children's teeth. One of the outcomes of that is this outrageous increase in obesity. So if we could now couple the two things and say, let's take the money out of the fluoridation equipment, the fluoridation chemicals, the fluoridation promotion, the fluoridation studies, and put it into health clinics and education, not only to fight tooth decay, but to fight obesity. And by addressing this huge overconsumption of sugar, particularly high fructose syrup, all these things would have a huge payoff for us. It's waiting to happen. And that would be the best experiment to take. The best experiment is to stop fluoridation and see how many people get better. That would be a great experiment.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for your passion and commitment on this issue. And please remember to acknowledge your city councillors and educate your city councillors, and acknowledge the library as well. Thank them for letting us use this room. And Dr. Connett, if you could clear a path for him, he's got to get up to the top of the stairs there and do a book signing. So go, OJ, go.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.